course, that's ours. And back to here. Close. Share screen. Yes. Window. This is the right one. Share. Why do we have no signal?
No signal.
That's a different problem.
It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. That's what we were just like, I don't think it matters. I think this is a meet echo problem.
Well,
We'll get started in just a second.
but why does this not displaying to that? Did somebody turn off the power?
No, this isn't. I don't know. This is an AV issue. Yeah, there is, but yeah, I don't. Yeah, I need. Can you put in a help thing?
There seems to not be actually be power to the projector, which may also mean that there's no power to the camera. Okay, well, we pulled up our laptops and I'll interpret advance your presentation. All right, I put an inquiry out. No, I don't, but it's probably my fault.
Did you? No, this has got.
It was just at the bottom of your IP, so that's my fault. This is what I didn't know.
So everything was on, but
Somebody take the power out from under the table and hopefully they reflect it.
is the TV on or no?
It kind of meets you screen, but
Okay.
it's back to meet you, but not the right thing.
All right, I think they're powering up, so.
Yeah. I mean,
See my steps in? Good.
their eye.
I think it's sharing.
Share again. So try sharing. Huh.
So we're not sharing. I'm supposed to be sharing, but nothing is actually. You can see it in Meet Echo, but it's not up there.
Can you try it unsharing and then doing it one more time?
I did
Oh, you
this.
did?
It was sharing, and then I can do it again if you want, but.
Was there a computer on here that was plugged in?
No,
by chance?
I mean there is. It's that one, but
Yeah, okay.
this. I mean you can see what's being
Yeah.
shown remotely. It's just not being shown locally. So have we?
So welcome to the JWP BOF. We're currently experiencing some technical issues trying to get the computers rebooted here, but we will be starting momentarily. So if you had intended to be on a different, if you had a different destination in mind other than JWP, now is your chance to escape. I'm John Bradley, one of the co-chairs. This is Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen O'Donoghue. I'm one of the co-chairs.
And if we can't get this going, it will all be done via interpretive dance.
By John, not by me. Go ahead.
It wouldn't be the first time.
Okay.
They're on it.
All right. I mean,
Looks like we may have something.
yeah, I know they're.
Yay.
After this meeting, we will be marking that chair as not an inhabitable chair, so other people won't sit where Mike is.
Don't take the plug out by moving away. Just stay still.
All right. In any event, this is the JWP BOF. The welcome to the meeting. This is the note well, which you will have seen multiple times this week. If you have any questions, feel free to ask John or I or our area directors about any of the material here. The so that we are in the administrative and agenda bashing portion of the agenda. Do we have a scribe? Did we do a scribe? Do we have a volunteer to be scribe, please? Using the convenient note-taking app. Scribe volunteer? Anyone? Anyone? This doesn't bode well for, oh, excellent. We got one. Thanks, Chris. Yes, there is a note-taking app. Anybody can actually help contribute to the notes as you go. So if you want to make use of that. If you have forgotten to do so, please scan the QR code so that you have signed your blue sheet. And I'm pretty sure that is the list of administrative details. If there's no agenda bashing, we can move to our first presentation. Now the downside to this, I'm going to have to stop and share everyone.
As we're getting set up for presentations, to add another administrative note that we've been asked to kind of repeat, everyone is required to wear a mask. The only time that you should be taking your mask off is if you are speaking at the mic in the front of the room, or if the chairs are speaking at their mic. When you're even speaking at this microphone, you should be wearing your mask. Thanks so much.
Hello, I'm Mike Jones from Microsoft. I'll be talking about the motivation for the work that we're discussing. Others will follow me to talk about some of the details of use cases and industry demand for it, as well as some of the actual technical work, which is an input to this BOF. I'm a standards architect at Microsoft, and I was also involved with John and many of the rest, and Karen, many of the rest of you, in the original Jose work, which is relevant to this. So we're going to talk about the need for standards for selective disclosure, zero-knowledge proofs, predicate proofs, etc., which were not enabled by Jose and Jot a decade or so ago when we would do them next. So Jose and Jot have been a success by many measures. They've been widely adopted for identity use cases, not just those that some of us who were inventing it had in mind, such as OpenID Connect, but one of the things I'm happiest about is use cases like STIR, secured telephony in the IETF, are using it, and that's a sign of the general purpose nature of it. Its model had two roles, an issuer of a token and a recipient of the token. The issuer typically knows who it's intended for, often putting an audience claim in, and all the claims that are put in the token are disclosed to the recipient. That's what we're using today as Jot and the Jose stuff underneath it next. But there's been some new developments in the industry. Among others, there's a three-role model being used for some identity systems, including in various forms of verifiable credentials, not just the W3C ones, but also ones in the mobile driver's license space and whatnot, where there's an issuer, a holder, or a wallet, and then the holder or wallet reissues a claim to the actual recipient or verifier and may reduce the set of claims to only those that are necessary. That's one thing that's new. Another is there's been a bunch of advanced cryptography work happen, things like pairing-friendly curves and whatnot that enable you not only to disclose claims, but to disclose instead proofs about claims. So for instance, rather than saying what my actual age is, you might disclose a proof that the issuer knows that I'm over 18 or over 21, which you can't do in a traditional JOT either. Finally, with the magic of some math that a few of you in the room may understand, there's unlinkability. You may be able to take the original issued token, produce derived tokens for two different holders, and they can't know that it was the same token that they were derived from. So unlinkability. This is all cool stuff. There are real world use cases for it. I'm not going to talk about them. Two of my friends and colleagues are going to. Next. Oh, and I should say the last bullet on the slide. One thing Roman made sure that I included in the materials for motivating the work was that the W3C verifiable credentials V2 working group that one of the co-chairs is going to speak shortly explicitly took a dependence on this JSON Web Proofs work that should it become mature enough to be a standard in the IETF, they want to use it in the VC V2 work, and that'll be talked about some more as well. Next. So I won't go deeply into this. It's hard to use JOTs for selective disclosure because it wasn't designed for that. All the claims are in one package. If you want a different set of claims, you have to get a different token. There's no way around it. Next. I mean, the other limitation that we called out in the BOF materials is unlinkability. How can you use the same token, send it to multiple recipients, possibly selectively disclosing bits of it, and not have them know that it's the same party or the same token? Well, there's some cool math that Jeremy knows better than I do that underlies this, but we want to take advantage of that property. And again, you can't do predicate proofs, which is a third limitation that we could have called out in the materials. Thank you. Next. So as I've already alluded to, I'm not really talking to the slides, I'm just talking out of my head. There's new cryptographic techniques, new being a relative term. They've been in development for a decade or two. I mean, the UProve work, some of the work out of IBM, Zurich, whatnot, and others underlies some of these, often referred to as anonymous credentials. And they include toolkit things like pairing-friendly curves and zero-knowledge proofs. And I'll readily admit I'm not a cryptographer. I worked on JWS and JWE without being a cryptographer, but I knew them. And this is where I personally am here, that there's people who will keep us honest, which is great. Next. So the existing Jose specs and JOT can't represent the richness that these new algorithms enable. So if we're going to satisfy demand for real use cases in the IETF and with Jose-like formats, we're going to have to need new cryptographic formats. And by that, I mean, for instance, JWS was a particular format. It encodes outputs of mathematical algorithms as particular data structures in a JSON-derived way. JWE is similarly a format for representing inputs and outputs for another set of cryptographic algorithms, encryption algorithms. What we're proposing is a third set of Jose-like formats that again are JSON-based that can represent the necessary inputs and outputs for these newer spiffy cryptographic algorithms, and others will talk to the details of that. Next. So this brings us to the second theme of my presentation, which is what would Jose do? This is a shirt that Paul Madsen developed for a cloud, oh, it's gone,
It'll be back.
for a cloud identity summit some 6-7 years ago. That at the time was topical because we were also thinking about starting the COSE working group. And in fact, our friend Justin Richer put a slide as chair of COSE on the screen in the opening meeting of the COSE BOF saying, we should have as the guiding principle, what would Jose do? Hence the shirt and the joke. But there's a serious question here. So next. So if you've read the BOF materials, we are explicitly asking for the Jose working group that did JWS, JWK, JWE, JWA to be reformed in order to develop new cryptographic encoding formats that are JSON based, just like JSON Web Signature and JSON Web Encryption were, but that will use these newer cryptographic, or enable use of these newer cryptographic techniques that demand will be demonstrated for in a few minutes. I would assert, and I had conversations with the chairs and others about it, that the Jose working group participants are the right ones to be doing this work. I want to bring their existing expertise into the mix this time because they have history and expertise defining practical JSON-based cryptographic representations that have stood the test of time. Now, John asked a good question a couple days ago. Well, why not just do it in COSE? You already have that. The charter can be interpreted widely enough that maybe you could do the work there, which is true. But I'm not speaking as a COSE co-chair, I'll just as a contributor. I'll say that the COSE members and the CBOR people within it have specialized in defining representations for compact binary, which is noble. You know, I use it in other work, it's valuable, but it's a little different than defining JSON representations. I think it was Jeremy Miller who said JSON is actually harder because you don't have binary. If you can get a good JSON representation, it's straightforward to also have a COSE representation, but I get ahead of myself. So I'm explicitly queuing up restarting this working group next. In the materials, which have been available to you for some time, but if not, you could follow the link on your screen, is a proposed charter, recharter for Jose. And that's one of the things that Roman said we should have this ready to discuss. So we did that. That was a good call. The structure of the charter text reviews what Jose did. It has a motivation for the new work, which I essentially just cribbed from my previous slides. And then a set of chartered deliverables. And so my last slide, actually last two slides, because it didn't fit on one slide, next, is to look at the chartered deliverables to get these into your head, previous. There's potentially a use cases document and requirements that would be non-normative. There's standards track representation of the cryptographic formats that we've talked about. There's standards track documents for claims and or proofs sitting above that. Now, why are those different? In the same way that JWS and JOT are different. One is sort of signature level, the other is claims, and in this case, proofs level work. Next. You need how to use algorithms and algorithm identifiers to be registered. You need to represent or standardize how keys are represented. There might be test vectors like Matt Miller did for Jose, which would be great. And We do want it to be in scope, although it probably is not the first thing we would do to do the CBOR equivalence. That's the ask. None of these should be surprising. It's basically what you have to do in order to have a full ecosystem using these algorithms. With that, I will sit down and bring up the next presenter. Thank you.
Christina?
Yes,
Okay. Find Christina's.
I will.
So, okay. Oh. So we do have your own.
Yeah, one clarifying question, please. So what we didn't talk about, what you didn't talk about when you talked about the charter, is the scope, and specifically, you're not calling for a JWP working group, you're calling for a rechartered Jose working group. And so if I come up with a new national algorithm that I want used within JWS, would that be inside the scope of the new rechartered group?
It's a fair question, and we did not list stuff as being explicitly out of scope. And, you know, Roman may come to the mic and say we should do that, which would be okay.
Hi, Roman Danelio, sponsoring AD. Just to answer the specific question, why did we call this BOF JWP? It's a data tracker thing. We needed a different identifier to kind of do the scheduling of the BOF.
My question was about the proposed working group.
So to restate your question, if the new working group, and we haven't decided where we're going to be doing this work, but if the new working group includes the old Jose charter responsibilities, would somebody be able to bring a new algorithm definition to that working group?
As
And
just one example.
I would
yes.
guess that since there isn't any other obvious place for that, and if it's in the charter, then sure, but we have to decide where we're going to do this first. So if you had other things that you wanted Jose to do, then that might be a good reason to do it in Jose. Richard.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to maybe reframe some of what Yaron was after. I would just posit maybe that a design goal here should be to minimize reinventions. So to the degree these places where we need selective disclosure, you're going to have something signed by an authority. Like that signing bit should use JWS, and then the proof thing should be part of the signed payload. So this is getting a little bit into details. I just wanted to kind of throw out that general design principle that as opposed to creating a new thing from whole cloth, we should be reusing those Jose tools to the maximum extent possible.
This is Mike. We may reuse bits of it, but there's bits of it that can't be represented. Some of the advanced cryptographic techniques use one signature over many sets of claims, and yet you can selectively disclose them, and you can get unlinkability, and you can get proofs, and it's just not representable using the cryptographic formats that we have.
No, I get it. I get that we're going after things like Merkle trees of claims here, where you can pick out subsets of the claims. Totally get that that's different stuff from JWS and signing things. But to the degree you're going to take this bucket of Merkle treeized claims that can be subsetted and associate it to something else and sign it by an authority, like that thing should be, a claim that is signed, and that you can then subset. It's a subsettable signature, effectively. But it's
Participate
still
in the
composed like that. But my point is, like, this is not a separate thing. It's not like a brand new thing. It's a thing that goes within a thing that exists already.
Participate in the working group and have those discussions.
So this is the last question before we go on to Christina.
Yeah, this is Hank. I hope so. And I might get ahead of you, as you said. Just a quick, because I'm curious. You said there might be a natural progression from JWP, which might be the old thing, doing the new thing, to CBOR, because that's easy actually. Will that be a dedicated item in the chartering process? That it is. So I have to read back. Excellent. So because I think, yeah, that's excellent.
Okay, Christina?
Hi, Christina. I'll be speaking more in my capacity as a co-chair of the Diversity Verifiable Credentials Working Group, which has been recently rechartered to do version 2 work. As you know, version V 1.0 has been published last year, I think, when V 1.1 has been published recently as well. We have another co-chair of the VC working group, Brent Zundell from Avast in the room, to keep me accountable and to help me answer questions if necessary. The title says why selective disclosure, but it really should be fixed to more like why selective disclosure, unlinkability, predicates, and also these advanced capabilities that we cannot really do with JWS right now because it did not allow using this new emerging cryptography. And I'm really here to speak from a perspective of these use cases and what the need for this work externally. Next, please. So one of these, so Mike already touched upon this, so I'm not going to go deep into this, but essentially there are new flows, new architecture emerging where issuance of a credential, in a sense that the collection of user claims is being decoupled from the presentation of those. So if now when request to present a credential comes in, you get the user consent real time, and the credential being passed arguably includes only the requested claims. So it's already selectively disclosed pretty much, where now we're entering the world where issuer has pre-issued the credential with 10, 20 user claims, but you don't want to be disclosing all of them every single time you're talking to a different relying party, different verifier. And again, the space we're entering is you don't maybe want to even disclose your identifier to every single verifier because you want to prevent relying party user unlinkability, and issuer has sent you the actual string of your birth date, but you don't want to disclose it. You want to disclose only the fact that you're over 21, for example. So that's why, the keywords like selective disclosure, unlinkability, predicates have been more and more mentioned in the space because of this kind of moving towards decoupling of the issuance from presentation. The next slide, please. So why JWP, right? So we need a solution that is standardized. There are a couple of solutions out there, but CF4G and IETF and IETF's capability, like that is what we hope would really help solve this really, really hard problem. And so I think that was the main point I was trying to make in the slide. So I put them really quick. I don't, but I think that was really, let's have a really standardized process with the all the experts in the room. And going to the last slide. Oh, sorry, and I didn't have a slide for that, but probably I was trying to mention in the previous slide was I also actively participate in the ISO working group working on ISO mobile driving license specification, and that one also has. So there's another example apart from W3CVC working groups that has defined this model that decouples issuance from presentation. And that's a place which faced exactly the same problems of selective disclosure, unlinkability, and predicates. And how they solved that is for selective disclosure, it's a sorted hash-based mechanism. For unlinkability, it's a batch issuance of a credential. So each credential has a separate identifier that you can use per verifier. And for predicates, it's issuer pre-issuing a claim saying age over 21, true or false. And because each country has a different, age line, that forced issuers to issue, 10, 20 Boolean claims, age over 18, true, age over 21, true, false, whatnot. So I think that's another place where all these properties have been really, really used. And while they are kind of solutions without using emergent cryptography, but it would be really beneficial to have a standardized solution which could, apply, and with one computation, hopefully you can, fulfill these different requirements. And now going back to the slide you're seeing, just to comment on the thing what Mike has mentioned, that in the recharted charter of verifiable credentials working group, what you see on the screen, as a conditional normative specification, the working group has seen enough interest in JWP that it is explicitly mentioned. And what this means, if they're depending on the progress in IETF, that the verifiable credentials working group is willing to define how GWPs and algorithms and whatnot will be defined in the IETF, how that can be mapped to the verifiable credentials world. So this concludes my short presentation, because we want to give people time for questions and discussions, but just to illustrate, the use cases and the need for this work in a couple of important use cases that I think many people are aware of.
Any questions, like 1 minute questions?
Questions? If nobody else does, then I'll put you on the hot spot. Is this work competitive or complementary to the JWT selective disclosures draft? Are you?
In OS working group.
Yes.
Correct. 2 points there. So one, arguably they both focus on solving a different problem. Selective disclosure for JOTS focus on providing a simple solution to do selective disclosure with JWT, JWS. So that is that focus. Here, we're not talking about how can we use JOTS with advanced cryptography. We're not talking about how do we solve unlinkabilities there. That is not in scope. And this is partially my personal view that I have shared with some of you in the room. In my perspective, SD JOTS, selective disclosure for JOTS, is simple enough. We've already seen for implementation coming up. It solves an existing pretty urgent problem in the space, because the problem in the space has been there is a lot of competing credential formats. And while JOTS have been simple and developers know how to use it, they don't allow these properties, which are, for the reasons I've explained, have become necessary. So we need to give the market and the developers an immediate solution to those problems, which is where SD JOT, selective disclosure JOT draft in OAS comes in. But again, because of the reasons I've highlighted, unlinkability and predicates, and those are really important problems we need to solve, and that's where JWP comes in. So I personally do not see them as a competitive efforts, rather as a complementary efforts, where in, again, certain use cases, from what we have heard, SD-JOT would be sufficient. But from other emerging use cases, GWP would be required. So that is there's a difference in use cases, there's a difference in timeline, and there's difference in complexity / algorithms, and obviously the power that provides.
All right, we have one person in the queue. Richard, go ahead, but can you make it really quick because we're way behind?
Yeah, and this may be a bit duplicative with what I was just asking. John, thanks for bringing up the John selective disclosure stuff. I wasn't aware of that. But that, I think, goes to the core of the question I was asking earlier about reuse of stuff. Because a lot of this kind of selective disclosure stuff seems like it properly belongs inside a signed thing. So I guess, Christina, maybe the question here is, could you put a kind of clearer point, finer point on kind of what isn't possible inside of a JOT that we would need to break out of that container format and do something different?
What's the question? I couldn't hear.
So what things can you do in JWP that you couldn't do with SD JOTs? Is, I believe, Richard's question.
That's a great question, and I can try to answer it, but I would rather defer that to Jeremy and Tobias, okay. And they can focus on answering those questions. Yeah.
Yep,
Okay,
happy to
so
take you down the road. Thanks.
move on to Jeremy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming and being interested in this. So I'm just going to give a little background on the drafts as they are today. So you can all read them. So I'm not going to try and describe what's in them. Just a little context around how they came to be, and just a really quick overview. Next slide. So some of this is going to be a little repetitive from things you've already heard, but really it's about a new container format that fits within the Jose family. We want to support the newer algorithms and techniques. We have to establish the role of a holder, and that's really probably the biggest fork from where the existing Jose standards are working today, is this concept of a new role and what that role is able to do. And really it's, some of the harder part is these messages that can be verified, but can't be correlated when they're presented. So presentation, and Richard, I'll be getting to some of this as we go through the slides, why it's different than just the JWS, because there is a form of a presentation as well. Next slide. So you've heard all of these, so I can run through this, we can almost skip this: selective disclosure, multiple uses. You can answer predicates, and you can do proof of possession. Next slide. Really quick history. We started circulating some of these ideas around the PSYOP and OpenID for verifiable credentials work in 2021. We decided to incubate this, since it's a fairly complicated task, in the DIF under the Applied Crypto Working Group, which has been very successful incubation and had some great participation. Lots of discussions, lots of great input from Mike on guidance. And we realized earlier this year, a few months ago, that this work really it constitutes a significant advancement to what Jose has done. And so we really need to recharter and restructure it within that context in order to do it well. Next slide. They basically look like this. There's one draft is the core container format. There's another draft which kind of parallels JSON web algorithms to describe the different proof algorithms. There's a barely formed draft around what a proof token might look like and how it might work. And then there's a few descriptions of some possible algorithms on top of that. And when I say use algorithm, I don't mean a cryptographic algorithm. I mean a description of how to use a cryptographic algorithm. So more of a profile, just like it is, packaging, just like it is in JWA. Next slide. All right, cool. Next slide. So what are the big factors in the design when you read the specs? We've all heard about this already. It's very common language out there now, thanks to the verifiable credentials W3C work around what is an issuer, holder, and a verifier. And we need this because we really need to talk about the holder. That's the big change here and what the holder is able to do. So adopting this terminology in these specs made a lot of sense early on. Next slide. These two privacy features, they relate to each other. And this is where it gets really hard to try and solve the problem in one way. And we've talked about selective disclosure as a feature, unlinkability. It's really where you trying to come up with a container that can serve both of these privacy needs, because they're both intermingled most of the time. Next slide. A quick visual on what that looks like. It's just something I threw together. You've got things that can solve for selective disclosure and things that can solve for unlinkability. Single-use tokens are unlinkable. Using hashes, you can do selective disclosure. But when you try to do both at the same time, this is when you get into this stack of more advanced, newer capabilities in crypto algorithms.
Sorry, Jeremy, if I can go up to the question real quick.
Go ahead.
Just to be clear on your unlinkability property, you are saying that after a credential has been issued, you want the holder to be able to mint new presentations such that the presentations are not linkable with each other or with the credential?
Exactly. And while the message itself may contain things that are linkable, like an email address, The goal is for the container format to not require that or like accidentally make it linkable in and of itself. So a holder can choose to make something linkable and disclose things that are linkable, but the cryptographic elements within it aren't, forcing their hand there. So the trying to keep this simple has really been the focus. So when you read the specs, there's the first JWP core draft tries to not talk about more of the advanced algorithms, but just a container format upon which we can define those other algorithms. We also tried to identify some techniques that are adoptable today that are combining single use and hashes. And that gives you a mechanism to bring both of these features together without doing the more advanced algorithms. But it's very inefficient to do it that way. And so there's new signature types with new capabilities that come with them, such as BBS, which we'll hear just a bit about more in a bit. And then there's a lot more advanced crypto, discrete log, proof of knowledge, all of the ZKP work, mercurial signatures, predicate proofs, verifiable compute. A lot of analysis has gone into what are those capabilities within those and how can they map into an algorithm, a proof algorithm that will still use the same container format. Next slide. Really quick visual comparison. JSON web signature, we're all familiar. Next slide. Perfect header payload signature. Next slide. This is what our current draft shows as a JWP. You see here that the payload is now 3 individual messages, and those messages are separated by a tilde sign. So it looks a lot like a JWS. It's just you have individual messages within this container format to work with. Next slide. And that's just, yeah. Next slide. Go back. So when you do a presentation, this is actually just a little bit out of date. I've missed this slide. When you do a presentation, you can omit the payloads. And so you know that they were there, but you don't see those payloads. And when you do this, most crypto algorithms will change the signature as well, so that signature is in that presentation is different. And what I didn't show here is that there's also a presentation header. So the issuer has a protected header and the holder gets to add a presentation header. And that's where things like a nonce come in from the verifier in order to make sure it's not replayable. Next slide. And that's the quick overview of the drafts. Love the feedback. Go out and read them.
Yeah, we're getting down on time and we need to cover some questions at the end. So Tobias is going to give us a quick presentation.
Yeah, hi. So I'm just going to give a really quick view over some of the basic properties of BBS as one of the algorithms that's compatible with the JWP draft. So as you can see here, effectively signer, prover, holder, verifier, it corresponds to the issuer, holder, verifier parties we spoke about, and effectively you have 2 cryptographic structures. The signature with the set of messages, that's the selective, that's essentially the structure that Jeremy showed in the first part, and then the second part is the presented form with the proof. And therefore, without something like JWP, you would struggle to represent the cryptographic information that BBS provides as an algorithm. So just next slide. Just a couple of use cases. This one's pretty obvious to most. It's the privacy preserving anonymous credentials use case. Moving on to the next one. This is just to talk about proof of possession. So the idea that you can essentially use an algorithm like BBS with a representation format like JWP. You can issue a token and then the prover can generate infinite proofs of possession with a nonce contributed via the verifier, so they can do a simple proof of possession of, say, an access token if they wanted to. So not even using selective disclosure in this case, and that's, I think, a really important use case to call out. The last one. This is non-correlating security token proofs. This is essentially the unlinkable presentations use case that was spoken about, which is the idea that a client could be issued a single token and generate infinite proofs to different resource servers or relying parties, proving whatever that token proves them to. And the cryptographic proof and the information revealed, the cryptographic layer wouldn't create any correlation like a fixed signature or say a bearer token in a protocol like OAuth2 would. So hopefully that helps to clarify the unlinkable property. And with that, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, we have a couple minutes for general questions. Richard.
So I think I had more of a off discussion point than a question. So I'll yield to people, folks with questions if there are some.
Okay. Benjamin?
Okay, so I guess this is maybe a question for Tobias, but with the BBS signature, it sounded like, you know, when you go to the issuer and you ask for a signature, you have to present this set of messages, and it sort of sounded like that set of messages was going to be like the different sets of information that could be released out. And I was trying to think about this from a pretty high level perspective of like, what information does the issuer have with the, like, this is supposed to be for privacy preserving benefits, you know, when I go to present these to verifiers and whatnot, but does the issuer know everything that I'm going to do? Like, how much information does the issuer have?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Yeah, so the applications for a scheme like BBS could be, there are multiple applications. So in some instances, the issuer might be, say, an issuing authority that has claims on a user anyway, and they're simply trying to represent, say, a driver's license in a cryptographically verifiable manner, but they want to essentially discriminate on a claim-by-claim level so that the user, when they receive this in the cryptographically verifiable form, aren't pushed into a scenario where they have to reveal all information, basically. So that's the selective disclosure. So visibility of the attributes in that scenario is, yes, the issuer would know the value of the attributes that they are signing. But schemes like BBS also support pre-committed values as well if you wanted to have blind attribute signing. And in my opinion, JWP is just a representation format, so it wouldn't care if that was essentially a pre-protocol involved.
All right, thanks.
Richard again. Or are you still waiting for the end, Richard?
Did you join?
Yes, Brian stepped behind me.
Oh, I forgot to join on my.
Oh, actually, if there's a mic.
Go for it, Brian.
Go ahead, Richard.
No, Richard said Brian can
Richard
go.
deferred to me. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Richard. Couple of things. I'll try to make it coherent. But as some of the discussion around the selective disclosure JOT stuff we talked about earlier, I think has shown it's actually not difficult and very reasonable to do selective disclosure currently with the pieces that are available with Jose and JOT. And following along on that, I did read through the drafts. I must admit, I don't think I'm smart enough to fully understand them, but I did see what I thought was a sort of a mashup of existing Jose algorithms into the JWP format to achieve selective disclosure-like properties in JWP, but not the unlinkability pieces of it, which has a similar sort of characteristic to selective disclosure JOT. One of the, I hope people are aware, or maybe they're not, that there's been some pretty significant criticism of JOT and Jose out in the world as having caused security and implementation bugs based on decisions we made, for better or worse. I was involved with it, so it's not a criticism from me, but I think there are some valid criticisms. One of them is that we treated the same kinds of things, or we treated different things as the same kind of thing in terms of its representation, which has inadvertently led to confusion type mistakes. A MAC and a signature are represented the same way. An unsigned object and a signature are represented the same way. So I have some, and this may be too early for this as we're talking about rechartering a different working group, but the using the sort of lower level constructs of JWS to build up a JWP that doesn't have the same properties of a JWP with the newer form cryptography feels to me like a potential area for that sort of confusion to propagate and continue, because from the outside it's a JWP, but you have to look at the underlying details to know it's a JWP that gives you these bits of JWP and not these other ones. So if this continues, I would encourage us to consider actually dropping that sort of lower level composite buildup functionality in favor of just pursuing the newer stuff, which Jose is itself incapable of representing, and allowing the other stuff to mature and be used on a shorter time frame under the same conditions and sort of promises as they already are with respect to JOT and JWS. I hope that makes some sense.
Brian?
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump in here. I think I have some thoughts similar to Brian's. And I think the core of where I disagree with what's been presented is Jeremy's description of selective disclosure and unlinkability as related, closely related questions, because they seem pretty different to me, even if there's some common technologies that you might bring to bear on both of them. On the one hand, selective disclosure is about, basically subsettable signatures, as I called them earlier. And as Brian observed, is pretty straightforward to do with the technology we have right now. Unlinkability is honestly kind of terrifying to me. I admit my background is in like traditional PKI stuff, where you issue a certificate and the certificate's good forever. And what you're talking about, bringing in this holder role, is having a credential that can be transformed in certain ways to become different things. And the thing that terrifies about that is that the transformer is not merely the authorized person, me as an identified individual, but because the important thing here is the holder is not the issuer, and so in principle anyone, maybe I'm misunderstanding some of the technical details here, but this seems like anyone in the universe can transform one of these things down the line. So this seems like a very different problem here, and obviously requires new cryptography that if we were going to charter something here, I want to see CFRG vetting on. So I would be much more inclined to charter something, much more comfortable chartering something on the selective disclosure problem here than on this unlinkability problem. Even on the unlinkability problem, it seems like there's a predicate question here about transforming what we have right now. To the degree we need to transform things to achieve different properties, it's not totally clear to me. I don't think I've seen the argument, at least, that you couldn't take a JWS that had certain contents and have a transform on that, with specific algorithms that would give you the properties you need. So it seems like there's a couple of question marks here on the unlinkability side. I think the selective disclosure side, there's abundant work to do. Some of it's already underway, apparently, in JOT ST stuff. So yeah, I would be a lot more comfortable on that side than on the unlinkability side.
Yeah, we're going to close the queue with the two gentlemen we have left, and then we'll move to the consensus questions.
I just wanted to quickly say that my company's roadmap looks like for the next 6 months, this is the stuff we want to do. And starting after that, we want to use JWP. That's where it is. We've been trying to do selective disclosure and unlinkability in a lot of places. We wanted to use JOTs at the beginning. We couldn't. It just doesn't work for what we need to do. It's not compatible with our signatures. And so when I heard about JWP, I got incredibly excited. I got so excited I came to IETF for the first time so that I could come here and say, we need this. Please let this happen.
Yeah, Nick Sullivan. Just a question for the proponents of this. Have you talked with the folks at the Privacy Pass Working Group? There may be some cross motivation on the attestation aspect of Privacy Pass that this may be relevant to. It hasn't been explicitly discussed in that group, but maybe worth talking to the folks working on those problems.
I know, but. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Ben Schwartz. I'm one of the chairs of Privacy Pass. I know that personally I haven't been part of any discussions about JSON web proofs, and I don't know too much about them. I do want to ask sort of the flip side of that question. Do you know, these are both efforts that have counterparts at the W3C. So there's, I guess, the W3C verified credentials work. Privacy Pass also has a web incubator community group activity originally under the name Trust Tokens that's associated with the Privacy Pass group. I wonder if those, I also wonder on the W3C side, are those groups connected or talking to each other? Because there's clearly some similarity here.
Christina, as one of the chairs of the Verifiable Credentials Working Group, can you answer that?
Not as much as we'd like, but there will be more.
And just to clarify, we're not working on the JWP related efforts, right? We are planning to use them to define how they can be used in the application side. So it's not like VC working group is planning to work on something similar. We would build up on the primitives, the container, the algorithms defined hopefully in this new working group, and define, well, how do we want to standardize, how do you schema, and how do you present the concrete user claims if it's a user identity use case. So just to clarify, and yeah, if there are any working groups we should be talking to, both of us are here and we're happy to, yeah.
Okay, so after a quick consultation with our AD, we basically think we've run out of time and we need to continue the conversation a little bit. So we have rescoped our questions a tiny bit. And I'm trying to stop sharing and I'm trying to do too many things at once. There we go. So the first one is, do you want to do the questions? Or? No, I don't think the questions. Oh, the wrap up. Okay. Okay, so we're not actually ready for questions yet. So I think the questions that we need to continue on is, the conversation that needs to continue as a wrap up is that we need to better understand the underlying design choices as a starting point, and the design choices around realizing the security properties, questions about assumptions. We do have the mailing list for now. The traffic on this is associated with the Jose mailing list. And we can talk about, are they allowed to do like a virtual?
We want to do a virtual BOF.
We could do a virtual BOF in the interim, and that might give us more time.
Yeah, sorry, we're having this multi-way conversation. We fundamentally ran out of time. It's clear that there's so much more to talk about, and we did not get to it. And so we need a lot more time to unpack some of those questions that Karen just talked about, which is what are the assumptions we have coming into this? What we heard about the security properties, kind of good start. Do we agree that the approaches to realize those security properties are exactly kind of what we want? So again, we got to find more time to continue talking if we're going to get legs on this.
Would that be on the Jose mailing list, or where would we find out about a virtual BOF to ensure that we're there?
So we're going to use the Jose mailing list for that. So if you haven't subscribed, please do sign up for that.
I think, Cullen, I see.
Sorry, I was trying to get myself on the list, but Cullen Jennings, I would also encourage us to better define the relationship between the W3C and the IETF. I think that was a solid mistake we made on the WebRTC work, and it caused a lot of confusion late in the game that slowed stuff down. So I think that's worth discussing on the assumption this moves forward too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ben Schwartz, I'd just like to encourage the chairs to forward any virtual BOF announcement to certainly Privacy Pass and any other working groups that might be relevant.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear on a process note, any virtual BOF that we have, assuming that that's a step we would take, would not only get announced on a particular mailing list, since it is a formal activity, would go to IETF announce, so it would go to the entire community if we were going to do that.
Right. We need to figure out the next steps, and we have unfortunately run out of time today. I do apologize for the power issues at the beginning, but I think that those 3 or 4 or 5 minutes wouldn't have made that much difference. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And that's it. We're adjourned. It's more of an adventure than I had hoped.